Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a remedy stranger than your cousin's conspiracy theories. Medieval medicine. Forget that fancy herbal tea you love. We're talking about leeches, bloodletting, and a belief that your humours might just be the reason you have a headache. Spoiler alert, there's a decent chance they also thought a good leeching might cure your deep-seated existential dread. So, before you hit the hay, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy laughing at the absurdity of the past. Leave a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and how late you should have gone to bed by now. I'll include myself in that club. Can we say too much caffeine? Now, dim those lights. Consider flipping on a fan to trick your brain into thinking it's a medieval wind, and get cozy. Let me ask you, have you ever wondered why a bag of wriggling leeches was considered an all-purpose medical miracle? What's the weirdest thing you've ever put onto a cut? If someone told you to stick some bloodsuckers on to fix your backache, would you give them a go, or would you run screaming to the nearest clinic? And once you're on this wild ride, congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1350. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, you've got a fever and your doctor has brought his trusty leeches. Hold on to your nostrils, it's going to get funky. In medieval times, if you had an ailment, the options were limited and often horrifying. Physicians, with their wildly inaccurate theories and dubious hygiene, were likelier to turn you into a medical oddity than offer healing. Their practice often involved theories of humours, while their patient gowns suggested they might have just rolled out of the hayloft. As absurd as it sounds, medicine was more of a theatrical play than a science. If you were unlucky enough to suffer from anything more serious than a hangnail, prepare yourself for a show of grotesque proportions. Imagine entering a physician's chamber, if you could call it that, given it resembled more of a butcher's shop than a place of healing. The air hung with a mix of stale sweat, and whatever concoction of herbs they deemed was worth wafting about. You might catch an eye on a table strewn with jars, each containing something that looked suspiciously derived from a creature best left unmentioned. Were they for diagnosis or decoration? Hard to tell when everything was suspiciously questionable. And diagnosing a problem? Good luck. If you walked in with a bad cough, odds were you'd leave with a treatment plan involving leeches, copper cups, and a huge serving of guesswork cloaked in pseudoscience. What could be more reassuring than the doctor pulling out an old tome filled with drawings of various animal appendages while muttering about lost humours? Ah, it seems you have an excess of black bile today. Let's fix that with some good old bloodletting. Bloodletting may sound like a scene from a Gothic novel, but it was considered the gold standard of medicine back then, especially when paired with a set of leeches. Yes, those slimy vermin that were sort of like the medieval equivalent of the modern-day supplement aisle. Have a problem, a leech will fix it. Your headache? That was probably 4 extra pints of blood, which just so happened to be lucky leech food. The tiny bloodsuckers, usually used in pairs or groups, were an analogue pharmaceutical remedy reflecting the institution's aim to balance your body's humours. Just imagine getting together with friends without knowing it could include actual blood-sucking guests. But who were these physicians anyway? They were often a mixed bag of university-educated elites and wandering quacks who studied healing by the light of flickering candles and possibly too many bottles of cheap wine. Some claimed the ability to read stars as well as symptoms, presenting a charming confluence of astrology and surgery. Just look up, my dear patient. The stars have aligned perfectly to drain the last drops of humour from your veins. It sounds passingly poetic, but it truly hints at the mixed-up approach they took to something as serious as human health. In stark contrast, the common folk were often better equipped to handle their ailments, thanks to their age-old wisdom passed down through generations. While physicians waged their capricious treatment plans, apothecaries dispensed clever remedies based on nothing more than personal experience with herbs, roots, and the odd bat's wing. At least these herbalists weren't prone to wearing the medieval equivalent of a fly-covered lab coat, and had some semblance of cleanliness. They didn't promise to turn you into a historical specimen. They aimed to help you stay on the right side of 6 feet under. If you couldn't afford a physician or an apothecary, you could always tap into the extensive medical knowledge of the village wise woman, a veritable treasure trove of no-nonsense home remedies. Crafty women had it figured out, touting solutions like poultices made of fermented pea soup over open wounds, or a good dose of herbal tea that tasted like lifeless grass and hopelessness. It was either that or reliance on protective amulets promising an escape from plague and pestilence. Who wouldn't opt for the chance to ward off death with a pretty piece of pottery tasting of sage and despair? As the candles flickered in those dimly lit chambers, you would inevitably listen to farcical medical terminology thrown around like confetti at a wedding, where education was as rare as clean drinking water. Honestly, if you walked out alive after an appointment, you deserved a medal for bravery. Ultimately, physicians of the medieval time were not so much your healing allies, but characters from a much darker play where the punchlines were dictated by chance and overwhelming odds. Survival was still the real comedy act. Thus, the picture of medieval medicine emerges, an eccentric panorama painted with a broad brush of ludicrous practices, incompetences passed off as nobility, and the odd moments where villagers turned to simple common sense. From the confusion of bloodletting to the leeches parading as magical healing tools, it was a chaotic world where health was as unreliable as the weather forecast of the time, but at least it was a system that kept everyone entertained, if not entirely healthy. And as we slip into our cosy beds tonight, let's thank our modern doctors who have traded in that confusing chaos for lab coats, vagaries, and a chance at actual recovery. Picture this. 4 humours dictate your health like a terrible game of rock, paper, scissors, but instead of keeping it friendly, it ends with bloodshed. Too much blood or phlegm. You're getting bled out faster than you can say medieval malpractice. No doctor's visit, and you're sure to leave with a few less pints than you came in with. Now, let's break this down. Medieval physicians operated under the misguided notion that your well-being depended on balancing blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile, which sounds like they just threw a bunch of colours together in a blender and hoped for the best. Think of the doctor as your overly enthusiastic bartender trying to concoct some wild new health elixir. The more ingredients he added, the more your health took a nosedive. Imagine walking into a tavern-like setting filled with the pungent smells of boiled herbs and rancid animals. You're partaking in a social experiment, and each visit is a gamble, the stakes being your very life. So sorry, my good man, but it seems you have far too much yellow bile. What shall we do? Ah, yes, another pint of blood it is. Let's examine the 4 humours. First up, blood, the chatty, charming cousin of the group. With its loud personality, it could make any social gathering lively, but too much of this exuberance, you'd be letting it all out with a pint cup in hand. A classic case of oversharing, in the most literal sense. It's a wonder we didn't have a medieval version of road rules where contestants could compete for who could donate the most blood through some manic combination of leeches and random bled outs. Next, we have phlegm. Ah, phlegm. The quiet, annoying sibling that shows up wet and sticky to every gathering. Not only did it contribute to coughs and colds, but too much of it also made the doctors roll out their golden leeches. Literally, they'd suck your spirit dry like an intermittent office romance. At least one exasperated cough was a parting gift to your doctor. It's hard to enjoy your meal amid all that gurgling. Yellow bile? Well, let's just say that it's the rebel of the bunch, always trying to stir up trouble. When yellow bile was in high demand, it often indicated that someone was too furious about a neighbour borrowing their pitchfork again. Cue the prescription for a healthy dose of laxatives. Nothing like an explosive outcome to calm your ferocious rage. If you think modern bathroom visits are embarrassing, imagine discussing this with peers before entering the chamber of judgment. Then there's black bile, the moody and brooding one of the group. If you are feeling low, depressed, anxious, or just downright miserable, it was because black bile got the best of you. And what's the medieval doctor's go-to response? Why? An involuntary detox session, complete with bizarre herbs and the chance of vomiting up your dinner along with, well, whatever else might be lodged in your throat. You mustn't forget that being labelled sad was often seen as a sure sign of being possessed by a demon or two. You simply couldn't win. Here's how the situation unfolded. You'd show up at the doctor's with an unsettling range of symptoms, and he'd glance at you, quill in hand, scribbling furiously, "Ah, yes, you're a bit too sanguine today," which probably means cheerful. Nope, that won't do. Perhaps we should apply a few leeches to remedy your humours before poofing you back to glee. And thus, your fate was sealed in blood. What's even more absurd is that many local doctors were simply barbers or village madmen, armed with uneven knives, an herbal pamphlet, and just enough knowledge to ensure that the cure felt like a medieval version of a Netflix horror series. They must have been the only people in history who could say, "Please don't panic, I can help," whilst pointing to their quaint scarred instruments on the counter. Over time, the understanding of health slowly grew more refined, but for every person who benefited from the pints exchanged, countless others fell victim to the theories of the four humours, and as the centuries rolled on, these misguided medical practices became stories for the ages, capturing the chaotic essence of medieval humour. So when you tuck yourself into bed tonight, think of the bizarre remedies. You could be debating whether an ancient leech is better than the last dental strip you tried on True to Humour Balance. Tell me again why we're grateful for modern medicine. Imagine showing up to a doctor's office to hear them announce that your treatment for ailments involves a good old-fashioned bloodletting. Sounds fun, right? Get ready for some questionable content as they bleed you into a bowl, all while believing this is somehow the panacea for your woes. Next time you're feeling under the weather, suggest a good leech session and see how much they love that. You might be wondering how this bizarre practice ever gained traction, considering the efficiency of modern medicine. But back in the medieval world, bloodletting was the go-to treatment for just about everything under the sun. Your headache? Bloodletting. Unlucky in love? Yes, bloodletting can help. It was the medieval equivalent of, "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" Picture this. You walk into the physician's office. The walls are lined with herbs and the soothing scent of some variously stale potion fills the air. The doctor, donned in a garish robe that hasn't been washed since the last outbreak, looks at you with an air of solemnity that could only be eclipsed by a papal decree. "Ah, yes," he declares, "the charms of bloodletting." He circles you like a vulture sizing up its next meal, picking up a bowl that looks like it has seen better centuries. Next, he brings out the tools of his trade, imported from the local flea market, and whoo, you can almost hear the dingy sound of the rusty scalpel vibrating with anticipation. Would this be more like a trip to a butcher or a spa day? You'll have to frame it as a noble pursuit of health, my friend, because who wouldn't want to lose a few pints while trying to stay alive? The belief that one's health depended on balancing the four humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, was akin to the ancient art of DIY home remedies gone wildly astray. The idea was that an excess of humour, especially blood, could lead to disease. Great logic, right? So in a move that is sure to leave your inner medical professional cringing, the doctor would use a blade or a leech to extract that pesky humour directly from your veins. Every drop of blood removed was believed to restore balance, however much floor blood was worth exiting your life. Now let's talk about the leeches. These squirmy little beasts were actually thought to be the medical miracle of the epoch. While you might picture a leech sitting in some stagnant water, it was considered a reputable member in the realm of medicine. Placing a few on your arm was like nature's pathetic attempt to hug you back to health. Imagine lying back in a drafty, sod-covered hut with a couple of leeches lounging on your skin as if they were on a holiday. Great day to feast, isn't it, they might say, slowly siphoning away the remnants of your vitality while you ponder who decided that sticking slimy things on your body was a smart health choice. But wait, the wonders of medieval medicine don't end there. If leeches were the life-giving spa treatments of the time, you can bet bloodletting came with its own cocktail of dramatic flair and danger. I mean, sure, bleeding to death at the hands of a doctor who looked like he crawled out of an ancient horror film might sound appealing, if you're into that kind of thing. It isn't every day you feel like a character in a gothic horror story after all. As your life drains into that bowl, which incidentally is going to end up as a centrepiece on some physician's mantelpiece, you wonder if this is really how you want to go. Now, let's unpack the repercussions of overly enthusiastic bloodletting practices. There's a reason that people wondered if the doctor was just a slightly mad scientist and not actually out to cure anyone. Not only were you potentially losing life-sustaining blood, but you could also spend your last moments questioning life choices that led you down this path of no return. If you accidentally became a chronic bloodletter and had to cancel on the wine parties at the Royal Bloodletting Club, this was going to be a long, drawn-out experience of self-discovery and sarcasm. So, next time you find yourself complaining about a headache or a mild allergy, remember the medieval folks who had to endure the grim realities of bloodletting. They actually believed that being drained of vitality was a point of honour. As you drift off to sleep, comfy in your modern-day, hospital-sheeted bed with pillows yet to be stained by hopes of leeches and blades, be grateful for advancements in medicine. It must be wonderful to wake up every day without fearing your doctor is going to suck the life out of you, literally. Leeches. Tiny, slimy creatures with an unshakable reputation as nature's bloodsuckers. In the medieval world, these little vampires were seen as cure-alls. Have a headache? Slap a leech on it. Sprained ankle? That's nothing a decidedly rude leech can't fix. Forget modern-day treatments. These tinier-than-a-pinky prodigies are here to save the day, if saving involves draining your life force. The medieval physician's toolkit was filled with an array of dubious items, scalpels, potions brewed in bathtubs, and yes, bundles of leeches, the celebrity guest stars of the medical community. What's most perplexing is how the good folks of the Middle Ages came to believe leeches were the key to happiness, health, and possibly even the local pub's best ale. Lost a finger in a farming accident. Not to worry. A few leeches could quench their thirst with whatever blood remains. Your last hasty meal, those leeches will rinse and repeat and maybe leave you looking even worse than when you got here. You see, back then, blood was believed to be the giver of life. Actually, flavours of life. If you were feeling a bit off, a good bloodletting session was recommended as generously as one would suggest ordering the soup of the day. Doctors often explained bodily health in terms of 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile. Much like an unsavoury chicken soup gone horribly wrong, mixing the culinary arts with desperation and confusion. Too much blood. Time for some leech therapy. They wouldn't just suck those fluids. Those little savage soldiers were transforming you into a walking, talking blood bank. Leeches operate almost like those awkward relatives you can't shake off at family gatherings. Once they latch on, it's a struggle to extricate them without a little bit of finesse, or an act of God. And speaking of divine intervention, it was believed that a well-placed leech could also remove bad blood, or be the unfortunate sacrifice to the gods of health. you'd find yourself praying to the Almighty, who could probably roll his eyes and contemplate how we'd advanced past using leech blood donation models. So you've got a leech on your ankle sucking away while you dance delusionally to those medieval tunes about how pleasant your day has just become. How far we've come, no? With swelling adhesive buddies thriving on your life essence, the question becomes, how did anyone find the charm in this? Perhaps it was the spectacle. Picture it. Villagers swirling around in darkened chambers, dimly lit by flickering torches, huddled over a frail fellow whose ankle is home to a leech party. Instead of panic and nausea, there are conversations about the philosophy of life intertwined with the cheers of saving time on dinner prep. Eat soul food? Please, people were contracting lunch for their leeches. Harvey, just the neighbour's leech. Hark and behold how one docile creature could become the star of the post-dinner show. And it was not just for the peasantry. Nobility partook as well, treating themselves to leech therapy while donning the finest furs and sipping from goblets of ale, redolent of stale blood, though in great form, of course. Even the monks got in on the act, believing these worms could cleanse old sins from their blood, which, let's face it, would make for an interesting confessional after snacking on a heaping plate of grandiosity and ill-advised self-importance. But the relationship with leeches became ever more complicated, eventually as whispers of plague evolved into something more substantial. These creatures were sometimes blamed for harbouring evils more potent than their sliminess could express. Dare we say the leeches were transformed from life-giving aspects into suspected minions of doom? By the church, of course? Imagine being a leech in medieval times, facing the harsh reality of being scapegoated with such alacrity. Before you could say, enteleki, leeches went from trending treatments to full-on outlaws. In the end, the humble leech wound up as both healer and culprit, stuck between an era that viewed science and medicine through a warped lens of faith and superstition. They became the star players in a time when hospitals resembled scenes from horror movies, and patients offered up their skin with more trust than most people give their barbers. So the next time you feel like the world has gone a bit leechy, remember that in medieval medicine, the solution was often to throw caution to the wind and see how much your tiny neighbour could snag before saying, "Time out!" Because in the grand, often absurd arena of medicine, if it wasn't the leeches, it was certainly something worse waiting to greet you. Enter the barber surgeon, a professional who cuts hair, extracts teeth, and performs surgeries like a medieval Swiss Army knife. No certification, just a willingness to plunge headfirst into chaos, armed with a rusty blade and an untrustworthy rubber glove. After a visit to the barber, you could walk out looking sharp or bleeding down your neck. Talk about a gamble. If you needed a trim but also had a toothache, this was your one-stop shop. You'd straddle the line between becoming a Renaissance patron of healthcare and a very unfortunate case of mistaken identity. Imagine stepping into their shop, wooden beams overhead, the lingering scent of blood, sweat, and enough hair to fill a mattress. The barber's pole outside? Not just an eye-catching decoration, it was a sign of the dual purpose of this establishment. Red for blood, white for the bandages, and blue was just there for flair. Probably. Fashion was a mystery back then. You had to love a business that doubled as a butcher shop for ailments. No appointment necessary, and good luck trying to get your head stole for free. Of course, being a barber surgeon meant dodging the ever-present risks that came with every operation. The barber might have just stumbled out of the tavern and imagined that your tonsils really did need removing. Perfectly safely, of course. You could roll in for a quick trim and leave with a squirrel-sized hole where your last molar should have been. When it comes to medieval dental work, the motto was simple: a tooth for a barber, a patch for a heart. Please pay at the exit. Operating under a philosophy that more was merrier, these multitasking professionals didn't stop at straightening up your locks. Oh no, they delved into bloodletting, leech applications, and the occasional amputation like a clumsy magician at a party. "What's a little finger removal while we're at it?" was probably the mantra, as they moved seamlessly from cutting hair to cutting limbs, while simultaneously reciting the fanciful lore that one day they'd make a splash in the medical journals of tomorrow. As they strapped you onto a rickety wooden bench designed for maximum discomfort, you'd likely wonder, have I even met the barber before? Or was that just last week's stray cat? And just when you think it cannot get worse, they pull out their deck of razors, chisels, and the constant threat of, "Oops, sorry, looks like you're diabetic now." Picture a medieval pop-up shop. Grab your haircut, get your leg amputated, and make your next appointment to have your humour balanced. Still, not all barber surgeons were villains in the cloak of a cape. Some actually did know a thing or two about healing. They could bandage a wound that otherwise would have earned you an appointment with the local priest to bless your soul before eternal damnation. A minor cut could lead to a thrilling tale of survival. Well, looks like you survived the ancient sickle wound. That's a legend worth telling, my friend. Moreover, while high-ranking nobles with deep pockets sought expertise from educated physicians who might have read a book or two, everyone else, including peasants, townsfolk, and the odd adventurous squire, turned to hairstylists for life or death decisions. If the barber was feeling generous, you might walk away with your hair in shape, some leeches strategically placed to cure your ailing back, because why not? And perhaps a solid discount for being a returning customer. But before you pop off that chair with a delightful spring in your step, let's not forget about those hair-raising moments of seriousness that often turned fatal before lunchtime. Some barber surgeons just got lucky, surviving the acts of murder they conducted day in and day out. For them, the apothecary's curse, one for the doctor, two for the barber, was far more than a simple rhyme. It was a morbid truth. This multifaceted adventure of the barber surgeon encapsulated not just hair and minor health fixes, but the audacity to believe that they could reshape your very existence with a single swing of their rusty blade. As tumultuous as it can get, this was the medieval healthcare experience for the masses, providing all the hair-raising thrills you never knew you needed, while delivering potential doom wrapped in a bandage. So next time you sit in a barber's chair, remember, they may seem like simple stylists, but deep down every one of them is channeling their medieval ancestors, holding the weight of history on their shoulders, and perhaps with a few leeches in their pockets too. Because what's a haircut without a little drama to liven things up? If you thought modern DIY remedies were wild, just wait. The medieval home remedies ran the gambit from plausible to outright ludicrous. From applying mud to a festering wound to making healing potions that could double as a high-sugar soda, these concoctions had as much likelihood of giving you a stomachache as actually curing your plague. You see, the medieval mindset was a unique blend of hopeful simplicity and desperate improvisation, often resulting in home remedies that would have today's medical professionals scratching their heads while questioning their life choices. Take the common wisdom around head colds, for instance. If a medieval person battled a sneeze, they might be advised to brew a delightful concoction of boiled snails soaked in honey. Yes, snails, nature's unassuming slime balls. Who knew that gunky critters were the key to unwelcome sniffles? Imagine sipping that at the breakfast table while debating whether to sprinkle some extra slime on top for good measure. Can you even imagine today's alternative medicine scene rolling out a snail-infused tea? If someone on TikTok tried to sell that, it would probably trend for a season right before disappearing into oblivion faster than an ill-fated YouTuber trying to eat all the extreme flavours of hot sauce. And let's not forget the medieval fascination with herbal remedies. They truly believed that a few sprigs of this or that could cure just about anything. A sore throat? A tea made from boiled thistle was a go-to. But what's more concerning is not just the suggestion of thistles in tea. No, the real kicker was how they often drowned this herbal blend in 3 teaspoons of honey, making it a sickly concoction that could easily be mistaken for syrupy sludge. You could almost hear someone gushing. Well, at least it's organic as they prepare to hurl their guts out of their mouth. If you found yourself in a medieval household with a lingering cough, your options range from the mildly effective to the absolutely atrocious. Think while there were people diligently brewing their tonic with soothing herbs, some were probably chasing it with a shot of vinegar or, brace yourself, rubbing their throat with a slice of raw onion. Honestly, if they thought that was going to help soothe a cough, one has to wonder what they thought would happen after eating it. A lovely stroll down the street would surely clear the air. Speaking of food, not everything was bad in the kitchen, but some culinary advice was nothing short of bizarre. Ever hear of a meat poultice? If your leg was gushing blood, because obviously things couldn't get worse, an excellent medieval slow cooker option was using a raw meat compress straight on the wound. You could practically hear the doctor of the day thinking, "Why bother with disinfectant when I have prime beef to smear all over this mess?" I mean, who wouldn't trust a glorified meat bandage? Did it cure infections? Probably not. But talk about a bold culinary choice. This beef brisket is serving aesthetic and medical in equal parts. To treat everything from gout to flatulence, they lay down an array of concoctions promising relief that one might only dream, albeit nightmares, while awake. There was a specialty pot of demon-destroying elixirs crafted from crushed beetles and worms. Yes, you heard that right. If you thought that nightmare food truck specialising in deep-fried tarantulas was an experience, let me tell you, it has nothing on this kind of medieval madness. After all, what screams I value my gut more than a potion brewed from pulverised insects? Even the cleaning methods offered in medieval times could lead to more than just a shaky stomach. People often believe that bathing was a portal for disease to enter the body, a notion founded in mythology more than logic. Therefore, they would resort to filling their homes with aromatic herbs and flowers to mask that signature no-bathing smell. Good luck convincing your spouse that the lavender-scented environment masked the fact that you just got up and rolled around in a pigsty. Not exactly the role model for hygiene goals. Surrounded by a multitude of absurd remedies, potential treatments for life-threatening afflictions often came down to whimsical folklore or ridiculous traditions. You could pray, pop some berries, or even dance around a bonfire while chanting spells, all thinking, surely this is my ticket out of the plague. If one thing was clear, it's that medieval home remedies are a testament to human creativity, just maybe not in the way they intended. So the next time you feel tempted to experiment with one of those homemade tinctures you read about online, remember, while leeches might have been the go-to for medieval medicine, at least they left behind a good story, and not just half-digested snail soup. When it came to diagnosing ailments, medieval doctors could leave everyone in the dark. Their recommendations more puzzling than helpful. What's worse? You could have a venerable sir squint at your symptoms and deduce that you're possessed by demons for returning too quickly from the market without gargling vinegar first. Great. Now you're cursed and out of pocket. You could tell your doctor you've been feeling a little lightheaded, and instead of suggesting some water and a nice long down, they might proclaim that the spirits of your ancestors are angry. Take 2 leeches and call me in the morning. Indeed, prognoses in the Middle Ages often felt more like low-budget horror films than medical consultations. The diagnostic process revolved around a mix of astrology, herbalism, and wild speculation. You'd show up with a headache, and before you knew it, the doctor would be fumbling over your birth chart, contemplating the alignment of Venus with your brow bone. This was less about helping you with a split skull from a drunken fall, and more about deciding which celestial body had it out for you that week. Imagine bustling into the local healing house, where the air smells of rotting herbs and something that vaguely resembles burnt chicken feet. The physician, presumably wearing a hat that might have come from a mime's closet, is deep in contemplations involving your humours. You see, he explains, my diagnosis here suggests that you're quite an unlucky fellow, as your blood has become too moist and perhaps even slightly aggressive due to your nearly identical relationship with mildew. Wait a minute, was he talking about mouldy bread, or was he suggesting you're cursed with swampy blood? Either way, your prescription will undoubtedly involve leeches, because why fix your issues when you can draw the literal life out of you? If you thought going to a doctor today could be confusing, imagine hearing terms like melancholic and sanguine tossed around, while you're 2 steps away from a near-fatal bout of the flu. Why consult a modern nurse when you can have a wise man proclaim who among the saints has let you down? What if the cleaner in the pharmacy just happened to clean the shelf of the only remedy that didn't involve leeches? So, you limp back home, holding onto your wallet while wondering if you should have just consulted the local witch instead. Even worse, once coerced into a diagnosis, you'd be expected to follow countless superstitions. Oh, a cat crossing your path? Probably not a good sign. No kidding. A visit to a medieval doctor felt more like a trip to your neighbour's horror show than an actual consultation. Ah, yes. I see you've been struck by a case of rural depression. I recommend wearing a garlic necklace and avoiding your nearest swamp. Seriously, how did we get here? If things went south and you didn't get better, your diagnosis often came with a side note of divine intervention. The humble folk believed if you didn't recover, it was merely a knock at the door to the afterlife courtesy of God himself. Let me guess, you didn't make the right offerings. Time to double-check your prayer ledger. If you ignored the church's recommendations, well, you could very well find yourself exiled to the local witch's lair for a remedy that probably involved mandrake roots and a healthy dash of dubious magic. Let's not even mention what happened when you ignored that innocent summer cold thinking it would resolve itself. Mistakes like those transformed a sniffle into a medieval tragedy, dragging you down the warp of illness while hoping the church bell wouldn't ring to signal your next funeral. No pressure, right? For those with deep pockets, the allure of noble doctors painted a different picture. They had more theories than patience, and often suspected they were inventing new maladies just for entertainment. Your lordship, I see you're grappling with the infinite crankles of constitutional dread. A rare condition indeed, they'd exclaim, puffing their chests with pride, while regular commoners would roll their eyes. Just get the leeches ready. I'll pass on the philosopher's stone for now. Throughout, it's a curious conundrum how, despite their questionable practices, medieval doctors managed to keep society buzzing with the culture of treatment. Outside, peasants brayed for help, lungs intact, while the medicinal miasma from every home spilled out into the streets, carrying whispers of treatments gone awry. It became a game of survival. Would today's leeches be your saving grace or your gaping grave? With every diagnosis, humour held the power, and naive patients were left to ponder if their newfound disease was just a product of their neighbour's jealousy. So, as we ponder the misfortunes of past practitioners who thought leeches were the best way to extract humour, or anything else for that matter, let us remind ourselves how far we've come, and how we now attempt to refrain from swabbing the horrors of medieval medicine with a dash of humour and a sprinkle of historical hindsight. Fleas, lice, and the occasional plague rat were just welcome companions in any medieval home. These critters contributed to all sorts of ailments, so naturally the leeches fell into the small army of performers designed to combat nature's unwanted guests. Who needs insect repellent when you can have your personal leech squad? Just imagine it. The average medieval peasant, elbows deep in the philosophical debate of, what the heck is that crawling on me? Armed only with a bucket of leeches, a few prayers, and the strong belief that their lives were destined to involve as much parasitism as possible. Now, before we dive deeper into this calamity of vermin, let's set the medieval stage. Your home isn't a cosy, sanitised haven, but a charming one-room hut, filled with a delightful melange of family members, livestock, and, of course, a gifted ensemble of crawling critters. Your sleeping quarters, if you dare call it that, double as a livestock pen, while the kitchen features a delightful range of unused corners for, shall we say, nature to take its course. The air is perfumed with a fragrant blend of sweat, hay, and a hint of inevitable decay. Truly, Mother Nature was having a field day, and you were her unwilling guest. Fleas would feel right at home, bouncing about like they owned the place, while lice considered your scalp a luxurious hotel. Did you know that if you were lucky enough to live with children, those critters would find their new best friends in their hair? Yes, nothing says joyous childhood quite like a lice infestation to spice up a mundane day of back-breaking labour. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to perform the same bout of chores while constantly scratching like your very existence depended on it? Welcome to the medieval lifestyle, an itchy affair. In the grand thematic composition of pestilence, fleas and lice reigned supreme. Those magnanimous bloodsuckers weren't just couch surfers, they were vicious warriors in the battle against hygiene. Their presence was a combined project of art and torture, setting the scene for extreme scratching sessions during social gatherings. What was it that philosophers once said? A scratch a day keeps the doctor at bay. Or something close to that anyway, given that any doctor worth their salt was probably frantically trying to get the hell away from your thankfully self-inflicted scabs. And let's not ignore the ever-present plague rats that bounce between homes, each one of them carrying a PhD in death and mayhem. Imagine wandering around your castle, feeling a touch of medieval gloom in the air, only to trip over a rat carting off your bread while simultaneously ushering in the potential for infection. Kudos to those medieval architects who forgot to add basic sanitation systems to their designs. You might not have had a working toilet, but don't worry. Nature's biodegradable disposal method was right outside your window, while the plague took up residency inside, nibbling away at your health. Not exactly what we call a win-win. Now let's venture forth. Instead of ladybugs or butterflies, your yard was littered with nature's worst offenders, reminding you daily that the quest for cleanliness was a battle not of knight versus dragon, but rather you against a horde of inconspicuous threats just waiting to pounce. It was a grand game of hide and seek, only with the stakes being your health and livelihood. So, if someone told you to welcome these pests in, you might have raged against the notion. But medieval people weren't above humour, even if it was dark, scratchy-infused humour. They learned the hard way that, whether through leeches or life choices, you either embrace the chaos or succumb to the sheer madness of uncertainty. Now, for each ailment these charming companions inspired, whether the dreaded itch, a nasty rash, or something infuriatingly unintended, popped your friendly surgeon right in to create a new branch of the medical aesthetic. Why make bug spray when you can instead bleed the illness away? The nearsighted doctor mused. Only in his mind could excess bodily fluids equate to a miracle cure. Ultimately, the medieval perspective on pests and plagues was an absurd world of misery, comedy, and, bizarrely enough, an unwavering acknowledgement of life's chaotic reality. As a medieval peasant, you played the leading role in a long-standing tradition of resilience, scratching your head, both literally and figuratively, over how the leeches you once cursed somehow complicitly aided in your not-so-glamorous survival. Because in this medieval drama, survival wasn't so much about elegance, but rather enduring the burdens of an all-star cast of vermin, hell-bent on reminding you how generous life can be, with its little gifts of discomfort. Stepping into an apothecary was like entering a magician's lair, filled with jars simulating compounds and concoctions suspiciously marinated in dubious morals. Herbs, powders, and bizarre ingredients were the items of choice. While you're perusing the shelves contemplating your ailments, you couldn't help but wonder just how much of today's pepper is actually ground owl feather. Aromas swirl around you, dried herbs mingling with unusual scents that might have been fresh at some point. Now, they hover like ghosts of what once was, beckoning you to surrender to the weird remedies contained within. As you navigate this herb-laden kingdom, you'll find everything conveniently labelled with names that sound like spells from a dark fairy tale. Fennel for fortitude, mandrake for mischief, and foxglove for the more adventurous heart. The shopkeeper, a wizened figure with an unkempt beard and a peculiar smile, raises an eyebrow as you consider the Hand of Glory, a potion said to grant invisibility, but rumoured to be just a blend of slightly rotten herbs. Careful with that one, he warns. Last customer accidentally turned himself into a cat for a fortnight. What's your ailment anyway? Oh, just the usual, spasms, headaches, and the crushing realisation that life is both exhausting and a bit like being picked apart by crows. You nod, wishing for something more self-explanatory than pain of existence. This is the place where cures are brewed and sanity is questioned. Perhaps you need a splash of fool's gold, an herb whose name sounds more promising than the reality. This promising remedy supposedly cures ailments, but constantly leaves you wondering, are we talking about arrogance or just reality in overhaul? The apothecary feels like a last refuge for the desperate, where you can trade your aversion to common sense for a dash of magic and uncertainty. It's no surprise that common ailments here often receive equally common treatments. Ah, you've got the plague. Let's try some thistle root with a sprinkling of bat wings. That's right, a bat wing might solve all your plague woes, and if nothing else, it certainly adds flair to the disaster you're currently enduring. You'd have better luck finding a modern-day dentist who practices alchemy than actually curing any affliction, but at least it feels adventurous, if not outright absurd. Wandering deeper into the phantasmagoric abyss of cures, the apothecary's shelves reveal a staggering array of items ready to tip the scales of fortune. Powdered dragon's teeth, bottles of dubious liquid with a touch of baffling labels, some including unspecified animal parts. One size fits all. What was up with the Eye of Newt? You ponder this carefully. Images of beverages whipped up in cauldrons and lizards creeping in the night flash through your mind. Desperation. Meet imagination. And as you consider your options, whether to go with the vile tincture meant to ward off pests or the powder to ensure good dreams, which curiously resembles yesterday's cottage cheese, you begin to feel an inkling of hope. You're on a quest comparable to those brave knights of yore, each potion offering the chance to conquer the mundane. After all, who knew what a little herbal wizardry could do to lift your spirits? In any case, you can always hope that whatever concoction you select doesn't leave you worse off than you already are. Toilet misadventures, festering infections, and unexplained itches aside, if there's one thing you come to understand, it's that whether the potion works or not, you're probably better off than that guy in the corner who spent the last hour trying to convince the apothecary that drinking snake oil could actually help him grow wings. As you depart, you clutch your purchase, whatever it might be, with an appreciative grin. Tomorrow may bring more of the same medieval madness, but for now, armed with the illogical but amusing knowledge of the apothecary, you take a moment to revel in your strange assortment of folk medicine, ready to tackle whatever delirium or disease the next day brings your way. If being a medieval patient is a trial by fire, you at least have this much figured out. Never underestimate the power of the weird and wacky concoction that once made somebody in a similar position feel downright magical. or perhaps just a bit nauseous. If you'd like to move on to the next segment or make any adjustments, please let me know. The plague could wipe out entire villages faster than you could say hygiene was not a thing. Doctors weren't exactly beating the plague with magic potions, but relied on methods that would make anyone today shudder, like wearing beaked masks stuffed with herbs. Because who doesn't want to smell like dried roses while swimming in miasma? As towns emptied and people crumpled under the weight of this terrifying black death, physicians turned into high-fashion fashionistas of the morbid kind, donning their stylishly grotesque masks to ward off the very air itself. Little did they know, the stench of decay emanating from the victims made those herbs smell more like an unexpected banquet gone terribly wrong. Now, you might think that those doctors, popping herbs in their masks while making triage decisions like an overzealous landlord, would have a good handle on things. But in reality, the theories swirling around in their heads were chaos incarnate. Many believed the plague was just a fancy type of punishment from God, a divine tap on the shoulder reminding everyone that bad hygiene and immoral living weren't conducive to life, or at least not for long. No pressure there. It was like a medieval version of if you had one job, as they fully immersed themselves in the chaos of a mass non-hygienic event that wiped out close to 30% of Europe's population. Doctors had a few tricks up their sleeves. Sadly, none of them involved actual medical knowledge. When things got particularly hairy, leeches became the go-to solution for that pesky little cough or fever, as getting bled out often sounded far more appealing than hunkering down with the plague rumours buzzing around town. Oh joy! Getting your blood sucked out by tiny wriggling vampires sounded much better than just, not dying in the first place. Meanwhile, the common folks had no shortage of wild ideas on how to fend off the end. Some believed that carrying around a bunch of herbs would ward off the plague, while others swore by the magic of pungent garlic. So, picture this: a brave medieval peasant strutting through the streets with a chicken under one arm and a pot of raw garlic in the other, convinced that they were essentially invincible. The real question being, would the smell of rotten eggs mixed with raw garlic attract more of the plague or just push everyone away while avoiding death by sheer odour alone? And let's not forget the famous public health measures, or lack thereof. Yes, some brilliant minds thought it wise to quarantine entire towns, believing that shutting the doors while keeping the windows open for a pleasant draught would surely unravel the mystery of contagion. Nothing says healthcare quite like trapping an entire population in a disease disaster soup with a fancy sign saying, "We're not sick, we're just curious." Sounds like a swell concept, right? Well, those measures were about as effective as using a soup ladle to bail water from a sinking ship. Then there were the doctors who took to performing weird, complicated rituals involving astrology and chanting spells over dying patients, because somehow it sounded less absurd than admitting, "I have no idea what I'm doing." As if conjuring a few celestial bodies would distract from what was happening on the ground. A gory showcase of death, despair, and an unfortunate lack of basic knowledge regarding germs. You'd think with all that confusion, some real solutions could have been stumbled upon. Instead, advice like, "just pray harder," became the new normal. Churches filled with people begging for divine intervention, while, not far away, doctors were pushing leeches on anyone who would sit still long enough. "Hey, if we throw enough mud at the wall, something's bound to stick," became less of a metaphor and more of a desperate plea of medieval health officials. As villages transformed into ghost towns and the rich holed up within the stone fortifications of their castles, it quickly became apparent that the clergy were, let's say, getting their fill of the leeches too. After all, who couldn't use some unpaid interns to work the moats while installing new plague prevention measures? Hospitals turned into makeshift hells where the only thing worse than the smell was the leftover hope anyone had. With a plague ravaging the land, the medieval doctors were just as lost as their patients, providing a comedic, if not tragic, side to a story of fear and death for centuries to come. So, as we tuck ourselves into our cosy beds tonight, wrapped in clean sheets and surrounded by modern healthcare, let's raise a toast to our medieval ancestors, preferably with something strong and heavily disinfected, who bravely went where few dared to tread, willingly into the arms of leeches as they fought to shake a pesky plague. Because let's face it, nobody should have to endure a blood-sucking fiend while trying to avoid the fate of the world's worst Viewers' Choice Awards. Here's hoping that if you ever face a similar ailment, you can at least do it without having to dread the annual Last Soul Standing lottery. If you'd like to continue with the next segment, just let me know. The medieval surgery scene was about as chaotic as you could imagine. The lack of anaesthetic meant that when the doctor said just a pinch, they really meant a different level test of your willpower. Who needs anaesthesia when you've got the sweet lull of a surgeon telling you it's all in your head? Too bad they often pronounced you 3/4 dead afterward. If you were lucky enough to need surgery, consider your options limited to a wooden table or a dirt floor covered with a suspicious collection of herbs and whatever else the doctor could find. Imagine signing up for a procedure that goes down in history not for its precision, but instead for its comedy, where the surgeon took more pride in the amount of blood spattered on their apron than in their degree, which didn't quite exist yet. Let's set the scene. You enter the surgeon's office, which doubles as butcher shop and a poorly adorned tavern. Here, your surgeon mixes and matches tools like a toddler playing with blocks, an apron stained with the history of others' surgeries, an acquaintance's removal of a long-infected wen, maybe a spoon that they promised would really get in there. There's no sterile environment, just an open window allowing a delightful breeze of livestock and refuse. Needles? Yeah, right. You're more likely to find a rusty blade having a standoff with a half-eaten loaf of bread. Too unfortunate, considering that the overall healing component of this environment revolves around luck and your ability to not faint mid-operation, while the surgeon humours himself with tales of his past surgical misadventures. Now, if you think you're going to walk away from this whole ordeal without a good story, you'd be sorely mistaken. If something goes wrong, and you happen to bleed more than necessary, like a scene out of a medieval horror movie, guess what? Your nearby neighbours are already gathering to witness the spectacle. Surrounded by curious eyes and a crowd that gasps at every cut but eagerly leans in to catch the latest gossip, any dignity you might have had is sapped faster than you can say bloodletting. Recovery might be an ambitious goal as your wounds don't simply heal, they celebrate. Practically overnight, what was once a simple incision becomes a hotbed for infections that would challenge the greats. Your chances of ending up with a dreaded surgeon's mark are far more likely than leaving with a healed wound. So you're not just recovering from the surgery, you're also praying the god of potions might forgive you for whatever witchcraft you knelt before prior to entering this chaotic arena. Then comes the aftercare, which is hilariously non-existent. You sit at home, perhaps dangerously weak and playing host to a cadre of new ailments and possibly delirium, armed with no more than the doctor's vague instructions to just keep walking. Great advice for your newly healed, wheezing lung. Keep monitoring that cough, but remember, there are no hospitals, trust in the earth, and if it fails you, well. At which point your thoughts trail off as you ponder whether you have a ballet performance ahead or a scheduled tragedy. Still, some of the more famed surgeon-turned-barber companies boast of miraculous healing, if you could hide their indiscretions long enough for your reputation to remain intact. These entrepreneurial spirits were celebrated as much as they were feared. Folk would recount tales of men who saved a life, only for it to be a life spent watching marital spats from a straw mattress and lunching on pottage. Even more astonishing were the loyal marmalade suppliers who prided themselves on offering an array of magical herbal remedies said to bolster your immunity against all probable disasters. They would dress in colourful garb as if heading to celebrate a feast, playing their part in a delightful trick, like the bravado of snake oil salesmen wearing capes and touting some leech concoction that, with opportune rolling of eyes, was actually just beet juice. But alas, it wasn't all laughter and flying scalpels, as the shadowy side of surgical mishaps left deep scars on both body and dignity alike. The quintessential medieval surgeon stuck in the chaotic mosaic knew all too well that survival depended not only on skill, but also on your willingness to endure the biggest gamble of them all, surgery. And thus, medieval medicine marches on in disarray, a jumbled mix of cutthroat techniques, rambunctious characters, and the incredibly brave souls willing to take a surgical plunge under the most questionable of circumstances. The next time you think about your last visit to the doctor, raise your glass to those brave surgeons without borders, and to the ancient spirits that kept their spirits high even when their skills may have been, well, decidedly questionable. The medieval toolkit for diagnosis guaranteed so many misdiagnoses you could get a job at a hit-or-miss fortune teller's tent. From observing your urine colour to listening to the music of your body, medieval doctors were less scientists and more eccentric artists, hoping to pin down your ailment by throwing spaghetti at the wall. Many physicians fancied themselves as medical sleuths, using a small, ridiculous assortment of instruments meant for diagnosis, but mostly suited to turning your appointment into a slapstick routine. Let's start with that old classic, urine analysis. Doctors eagerly examined your pee like it was a fortune-telling crystal orb, sometimes referring to 4 distinct colours: golden, unclear, muddy, and ominous green. They'd hold up your container against the light and nod sagely, as if trying to divine the secrets of the universe. They'd ponder dramatically. Your urine is rather cloudy today, indicates you might be possessed. Because of course, when in doubt, blame the supernatural. How comforting to know that a simple urinary tract infection could land you in a temple of exorcism instead of, say, a pharmacy. And then there was the fascinating world of pulse diagnosis, where doctors went beyond mere feeling and began composing sonnets to your heartbeat. They believed the patterns of your pulse could reveal everything from your emotional state to the imminent invasion of nomadic plague rats. Imagine lying there, heart pounding as the doctor attempts to decipher its melody. Ah yes, very rhythmic. Clearly you're stressed. How groundbreaking. Hold the phone. The real kicker was when they often assumed any irregular pulse meant you were riddled with black bile. Next on the medieval medical docket was the wide-scale application of phrenology, the popular belief that you could map a patient's mind by inspecting the lumps on their skull. That's right, forget therapy. Just cozy up to a doctor while they poke your head, assessing your wits based on some good old-fashioned cranial topography. If they found what they deemed an abnormal bump, it could very well make you a social outcast for life. Not to mention how seriously inaccurate it was. Considering how many brainless heirs to the kingdom were running around back then, it's a miracle they didn't conclude everyone had bumps for brains. Mildly more scientific, the use of bloodletting, as we discussed earlier, stemmed from medieval doctors' obsession with the humours. Once they hypothesised which humour was causing your ailment, spoiler alert, it was always blood, they would break out their trusty lancets and head straight for your arteries. Let's just drain you of 3 pints of blood and call it a day. How rejuvenating. After all, it's hard to be sick when you're losing what little blood you had to begin with, right? And the best part? Your wonderfully considerate physician wouldn't bat an eye at whether you preferred leeches or a good old blade for this treatment. Now let's talk about that charm to eliminate all ailments, the famous smelling salts. Oh yes, the medieval equivalent of a red flag. Instead of gently wafted aromas, these little gems often consisted of rancid fish or burnt herbs. Imagine expressing a mild headache only to be greeted by the physician's desperate search for their most pungent concoction, which smelled unmistakably like a chip shop that caught on fire. Most patients quickly reconsidered whether they preferred the pain of their original ailment instead. Lastly, how can we overlook the trusty method of watchful waiting? Picture this. Your medieval physician gives you a dubious nod and says, "I'm not certain what ails you, but in the meantime let's wait to see if you spontaneously combust." So the next time you find yourself feeling dizzy, nauseous, or inexplicably clammy with no actual diagnosis, rest assured that proactive waiting has become the epitome of medieval medical treatment. The sheer ridiculousness of medieval diagnostic tools demonstrated that many physicians wielded limited knowledge lightly disguised by an air of authority. Coupled with the fantastical approach to illness, their methods guaranteed they'd have the patient just as doubting as they were. While the artfully chaotic methods of diagnosis led to many misadventures, they were oddly reflective of their time, a society trying desperately to make sense of the chaos in their bodies, even if it meant hoping for a miracle cure or drowning in misery. So the next time you contemplate a late-night Google search for your aches, remember that things could be vastly worse. At least there are no ogres lurking behind the modern diagnostic curtain, just a health professional who's slightly more credible. Religion played a major role in healing processes, and if praying failed to work, a healthy dose of dubious leech therapy was always relatable. To the medieval physician, it was a two-bite strategy: heavenly intercession and slimy extraction. For those who couldn't handle it, well, they relied on vessels of the idea that miracles are just fancy codexes waiting to be uncovered. When someone suffered an ailment, be it a fever or a cursed boil, the first course of action typically involved consulting a priest rather than a physician. After all, a good dose of prayer never hurt anyone, except perhaps for the conviction that you could pray away a plague. So, picture the scene. You've got your medieval equivalent of WebMD open, but instead of Googling how to tame a nasty cough, you're bustling over to the local chapel, where the priest is likely to channel a higher power while secretly wondering how the heck he'll pay his taxes this month. While you're trying to keep a straight face, he's chanting some incantation or blessing your fevered forehead, all with the hope that divine intervention will work two miracles today, one for you and the other for his dwindling congregation. Once you've had enough blessings, or after a single blessing that clearly wasn't enough, the physician might finally swing by, maybe on a horse named "Would you like an exorcism?" If prayers aren't working, it's leeches and the comforting thought that at least you get to breathe some fresh air while you're at it. A bloodletting here, a leeching there, and by the end of it, you'll likely be left wondering if the real miracle was making it back home without passing out. Now, let's not forget the role of superstitions. Those little nuggets of ancient wisdom claim to cure everything under the sun, while accidentally getting mixed up with questionable herbalist practices. A spritz of berry juice to avoid disaster, they might say, or sprinkle a few flower petals on your head. Of course, there's a good chance that flower therapy was simply the equivalent of putting on a scented hat, while your skin oozed more complications than your average soap opera plot. Medieval people had this strange habit of incorporating religious relics into their healing practices. You could find holy water like some modern Equinox gym membership. Essentially, everyone believed it helped, but in reality only the super devout often made it out dry. People would splash it on their faces, feet, or any body part approximately halfway, toward breaking that cleanliness barrier, anointing them as the resident saint of whatever ailment they faced. Want to impress someone? Douse a particularly troublesome rosebush in holy water as you introduce it to your neighbour. Nothing says, I've got a handle on this like a hallowed shrub. And of course, there was the Murphy's Law of miracles. If faith and leeches failed, called upon the relics. Yes, those objects considered imbued with divine power, pieces of bones, snippets of clothing that once belonged to saints, or even a fancy-looking toenail said to belong to St. Mysterious McMystery, fostered a sense of hope. People believed that carrying these items would remedy them like a knight roaming without armour, hoping they didn't encounter a dragon, when in fact the only dragons were those symptoms lurking about. Witness the inevitable blend of church and unofficial herbalist at the local market, where they battled for attention. Priests would offer you spiritual salvation, while the local herbalist eyeballed you suspiciously, shuffling about with her bag of questionable roots and flowers, because truly no one can out-earn divine healing quite like a woman bold enough to tell you that halting the plague involves a special blend of herbs. She knew just the right ones for spirit lifting and plague-busting. Medieval life was a mash of hope, absurdity and blind faith, where every doctor was a magician, and every ailment was a dramatic performance worthy of an audience. Each misfortune became a testament to the interplay between faith and folly, making each healing experience reminiscent of a circus adventure where you left with more than just elbow grease and a prayer. As you trudged back home with your steaming bowl of leeches and a fresh affirmation from the local priest reminding you that hope could lead to miraculous results, you quickly realised your ailments were likely the lucky winners of a medieval lottery, and the prize, an adventure through life's grandest absurdities. And in that quaint, belly-laughing moment, you'd want to hold on to your prayer beads, ready for whatever comedy awaits you in the next ridiculous chapter of medieval life. What's worse than an ailment? Being a woman with an ailment in a time when witch trials were just a casual occurrence. If you weren't dying from your problems, you might be accused of curing them with sinister potions. Good luck to any woman caught telling another, "Don't forget raw beet juice helps with painful childbirth." After all, in a world where the fine line between healer and heretic was as thin as a threadbare tunic, women were often on the receiving end of suspicion as they navigated the minefield of the medieval understanding of health. Picture this. You're a lady in 14th century Europe, and you've got a migraine that feels like a crow has made a nest in your skull. What do? Well, you might consult your neighbour Agatha, who claims to have the remedy. Just take this delightful concoction of foxglove leaves and honey, she says, brimming with confidence. Little do you know that her suggested delightful concoction is more likely to be your fast-track ticket to the end of your earthly troubles. Not only might you have to endure the pain of your headache, but adding suspected witchcraft into the mix could mean you're trying to ward off sudden accusations, or worse, a trial by fire. Now let's talk about the flipping double-edged sword that was herbal medicine. On one hand, you might have concocted something that genuinely helps ease your troubles, like the use of willow bark for pain relief, a precursor to modern aspirin. But of course, many of these remedies came with hefty disclaimers. Side effects may include being dunked in water to prove your innocence or withering under the judgmental glare of church elders. Who wouldn't want that for a simple stomachache? Communal gatherings for women were often the secret hubs of medicinal knowledge. Imagine a ragged circle of women around a smoky fire swapping tips while attempting to tend to their families. Oh, you've got a rash? Have you tried rubbing your baby's bottom with beeswax mixed with crushed herbs? And here's a brew to help with that cough. Just don't mention my name in the marketplace. Privacy? Forget it. In a world where whispers were as potent as magic, word got around faster than the flu in a crowded tavern. As you tread through this precarious territory of healing while being female, you also risk getting entangled in the broader narrative of womanhood within medieval society. Women were often seen as both miraculous and monstrous, capable of nurturing life while simultaneously seen as conduits for evil. If a mother lost a child and dared to complain, well, better get your dartboard ready for the nearest woman known for her midwifery skills. After all, a healer could easily be misconstrued as a hexer. Considering this environment of suspicion, it's no wonder more than a few women creatively sidestepped expectations. Take creative licenses with your herbal remedies? Sure, why not? They creatively turned kitchen scraps into cures, never letting a good cliché die on their watch. Who could ignore the paradox of a woman whose witch's brew could be a simple soup bursting with carrots mixed with a more sinister intent? Soothe what ails you, but you better skate the line between remedy and resurrection, darling, they would whisper over shared cups of herbal tea. This weight of expectation was only compounded by the belief that women possessed intrinsic magical abilities, albeit dangerous ones. The medieval mindset was a stew of superstition and misunderstanding, which turned any form of female knowledge into a potential canvas for grand narratives. Why? Because a woman consulting a bunch of herbs was immediately seen as more questionable than a drunken man passing by her sickbed. It's truly remarkable how a reputation for knowing what chamomile might do was enough to court disaster. In the tumultuous world of medieval health, some women not only survived but thrived despite the risks. They banded together, sharing knowledge in hushed tones, navigating their existence like deft tightrope walkers, carrying baskets of herbs on their heads, claiming their space within hallowed kitchens and hidden corners of the community. They created a tapestry of feminine power, one that thrived in practical knowledge while striking an eternal balance between fear and healing. So, as medicine evolved slowly over the centuries, let us remember those women who walked that fine line. Today, we proudly celebrate those kitchen witches who offered remedies as well as reproach, the unsung heroines of health who managed to heal while often hanging on the edges of horror. Because when it comes down to it, they were not just surviving, they were defiantly healing, one strange potion at a time. Some questionable methods defied belief, leaving most thinking, how is this supposed to help? Ever thought about coffee and cow dung? How about a healthy mixture of whale blubber and herbs? These cures could either leave you feeling miraculous, or as if you were auditioning for a bank of unsuccessfully implemented improvements. It's like the medieval equivalent of trying out that new trendy juice cleanse you saw on Instagram, promising detox but delivering a cocktail of regret and nausea. In this era, folk wisdom and medical knowledge swirled together like awkward dance partners at a village festival, producing an outrageous medley of concoctions that would have any modern doctor rolling their eyes. Take, for instance, the ever-popular cough syrup, which was astonishingly made from stale bread soaked in the urine of a young boy. Imagine that hype. Try the new herbal remedy. It's refreshing, trust me. It's hard not to wonder if the boys ever found out they were the star ingredient in the village apothecary's questionable blend. One sip and you could be coughing still, but at least you do so with the self-assuredness that history was indeed up to its usual shenanigans. Next, tailored remedy in the lineup. A beloved sinus-clearing solution comprising crushed beetles mixed with honey, guaranteed to open your nasal passages or promptly make you rethink your life choices. And let's not forget about the fame of the liver cleanse involving pulverized bird wings and vinegar. A delicacy that was supposedly good for your health and bad for your taste buds. One can only imagine sitting around a medieval kitchen table, eyes darting between various jars labelled with hopeful promises, pondering what exactly you had just signed up for in your relentless search for relief. Then there were the lucky folk with access to royal courts, where the remedies included a splash of revenge on the common folk in the form of green fairy, a potent alcohol thought to bestow temporary vitality, or at the very least boost royal appearances in front of a crowd. Nothing said, I'm fit to rule, quite like that healthy glow gained after a few too many swigs that left one curiously questioning whether their ailments were worth the jolly risks. Importantly, there's something to be said about those morbidly fascinating cure-all elixirs, often chalked up as the nobility smashing the boundaries of decency in favour of temporary relief. They typically mixed ingredients ranging from the seemingly innocent herbs to the utterly outrageous plucked components from deceased animals, with a healthy dash of exaggeration. Remember the debacle that was mermaid tears, a catch-all potion that was rather less about the tears of mythical beings and considerably more about the dubious adventure of chasing after the nearest fishmonger's overflow. It's standout winners like these that made every medicine a gamble. With regulations non-existent, even the bravest among you had to keep their expectations in check. You see, improvisation in medicinal healing was rendered an art form. Experts without expertise sometimes concocted blends that sparked genuine debate among villagers. "Does your elbow hurt?" Someone would reply, "Oh, fetch me some charcoal and moonlight, stat," making it all sound so enchanting. If only they knew that moonlight was just a euphemism for a bad idea, likely to yield side effects ranging from a new gastro issue to an unexpected relationship with your backyard chickens. At times, these miracles painted a desperate picture of the era, where every ailment, from common colds to chronic fevers, could be countered by questionable claims, hoping against hope that each dose brought a little cheer and not a full-blown melodrama. The charming irony lies therein. The more absurd an antidote, the more it felt like medieval life itself. Bizarre, chaotic, endlessly unwieldy, yet strangely beautiful in its outright madness. Medieval medicine wasn't just a collection of random remedies. It was a reflection of society grappling desperately with reality. With every odd cure and loopy treatment suggestion, the communities bonded over laughter, cringes, and grim acceptance that sometimes pain is just part of the package the universe assigned them. And on that note, here's to the leeches, the cow dung, and the colourful array of healers who helped create the unintentional laughter echoing through history. They might not have cured your hangnail, but bless their hearts, they brought a little bit of absurdity along the way. And finally, as you roll into bed tonight, feeling grateful for your modern potions and pills, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come from those laughably strange bedsides. Believe it or not, your ancestors were not only resourceful, but they were in on the game of life with absurd humour and unrelenting spirit, even if it meant chugging down some liquid mystery served with a side of beetle guts. So, sleep tight, knowing that when it comes to medicine, at least we've left behind the worst of the medieval quirky concoctions. The medieval hospital experience promised to be less like Monty Python and more like your worst nightmare wrapped in a shroud of blood-stained linens. With minimal comfort, less courtesy, and zero privacy, it's hard to get better when your roomie is a dying nobleman yelling about the unjustness of the vermin overlay in their bed sheets. Now, imagine being wheeled into a hospital that might be a converted barn. Sure, everyone has their focus on cleanliness, but we're talking straw floors as a standard underfoot and an absent janitorial service to maintain that fresh turned earth aroma of old hay, mixed with a touch of whatever just fell out of that creature. Patients with injuries would lie on rickety wooden cots, which would rustle ominously under their weight as they grappled with wounds. The humble appraiser in the corner juggling leeches in one hand would just shrug when you ask about pain management. Did you expect an aspirin? Instead, that friendly herbalist down the street might have whipped up a potion so sour that the gods above would weep. Bitter herbs were believed to heal, but you'd often wonder if they were just playing a prank on you while pocketing a good coin. Curiously enough, medieval hospitals were often linked to monastic orders. where the nuns and monks offered care not out of a desire to serve, but out of a holy mandate. This care usually came with a side of "pray a little harder" thrown in for good measure. Don't expect sympathy when you're hallucinating. They'll probably take it as a sign that your spirit's trying to escape. Can't clearly articulate the burning pain in your belly? That sounds awfully similar to a possession case to them. And hope you're not short on coins. If paying in good faith means offering up your soul for salvation, it's a thin line before someone calls for an exorcist. Sometimes patients even heard more curses than catharsis, as the bedridden wallowed in their own misery. If sharing a room with a scolding nobleman wasn't sufficient, consider the doctor making their rounds. Clad in a dirty tunic and throwing about medical jargon like balancing your humours, while inspecting your oozy wound with their finger, wasn't much to inspire confidence. Meanwhile, they'd rustle their sage-scented scrolls around as if invoking sacred knowledge, only for them to morph into a portrait of frustrated confusion. They might have thought you should have had that eaten rat checked earlier. Also, privacy was virtually non-existent. Exchanging personal tales lay between you and the other 5 patients snoring, moaning, or quietly plotting their own escapes. If the woman with a bad cough across the way gets an inappropriate visitor, good luck sliding her a discreet note. Heaven forbid anyone witness the moment you try to discreetly beg a leech for some respite from the itchiness of, oh wait, veneer of secrecy lost as 2 nosy nuns eavesdrop like the papal CIA. Now, let's talk mealtime. Dining in the medieval bed scenario would involve a hot broth that may or may not have been soup, only someone's 4th cousin could recognise. Turnip stew? Peasant porridge? More like, how to cure your appetite entirely. And if your stomach grumbled audibly during the noble's impromptu complaint about halitosis, well, that risked being the most awkward moment in your embarrassing hospital journey. Trust me, after enduring foul food, you'll question if your illness was truly worse than all this discomfort. All in all, the medieval hospital was akin to a coliseum for disease where patients awaited either a miracle or a mercifully fast recovery. With fear and death lurking around every corner in the kingdom's discomfort zones, it's likely many found talking about their suffering with a pesky leech was preferable to enduring reality. You'd often wish for a rickety conveyance back to a time when your biggest worry was surviving another bout of plague instead of surviving your hospital roommate's mercurial moods. The real kicker comes when you're finally given that grisly yet fleeting chance for a return ticket back to health. The hospices were pioneering the concept of purging in a still-inclined patient kind of way. A physician would assure you the coming lech therapy was based on hard-won wisdom derived from the past. Oh, happiness is fleeting, much like the memory of that truly delightful herbal concoction, or the hospitality backed by a chuckle or two over at the local tavern. So many patients emerged on the other side of their illnesses that you'd be hard-pressed to believe they also didn't carry the scars of laughter with them, recounting tales of their medieval hospital experience as the ultimate bedtime story, the irony coupled with a twinge of reality setting this comedy apart. So, in the end, surviving a hospital stay back in those days should be heralded as an ordeal of comedy, nearly on par with a Shakespearean tragedy. As dubious as they may seem, every patient carried a relentless determination, often clinging to the idea that next time they wouldn't succumb so easily to the charms of a leech and would take their ailments with a side of humour. Thank you very much. When facing what we now know as mental health issues, medieval treatment included a blend of holistic remedies and spa-quality experiences. Instead of tranquility, patients often suffered the curse of having their heads examined. Literally. Shock treatment included reading hymns or, far worse, being dumped in a river as a means of cleansing their demons. Imagine being escorted by your well-meaning friends to a serene riverbank, only to have them ceremoniously shove you into a gently flowing stream while chanting something about "drown the crazies." Friends or foes? Hard to say in a time such as this. As engaging as a medieval washing machine might sound, the intention here wasn't just to enthuse the local waterfowl. The understanding was that water washed away sin and clearly some kind of supernatural lunacy. If you surfaced gasping and spluttering, that was a sign to go back for round 2. And if you didn't float, well, congratulations. Your friends just proved you were definitely a witch. Nothing quite says self-care like a communal drowning. But let's assume you survived your dip in the river. Doctors still weren't approaching madness with much grace. Instead of welcoming you with a cup of herbal tea and a weighted blanket, a visit to the doctor often meant being heralded into a grim spectacle where your departed reasons were up for dissection. Figuratively, of course. Physicians were preoccupied with the idea that madness was caused by an imbalance of the 4 humours. No plum tea and guided meditation here. Instead, your brain's fluffiness, as they might call it, was thought to be the result of too much phlegm. The solution? Bloodletting. Yes, just when you thought you were on the mend, a leech slinger, or perhaps even your barber surgeon, showed up wielding sharpened blades, or, more commonly, a collection of leeches ready to give you an invigorating session of suck it up. Picture the scene. You arrive, distressed from your existential dread, and leave looking like a painted cadaver. Talk about a mixed bag of feelings. Once your blood was removed, because apparently that was how you found inner peace, let's not forget the still relevant idea of applying mildly terrifying concoctions to your mental woes. Herbal remedies were the go-to safe bet for those who favoured a gentler approach. You could expect a delightful medley of herbs such as thyme, rosemary, and occasionally some decidedly confused bat wings mixed together to restore your sanity. This was usually accompanied by a forced consumption of a potion designed to make your stomach turn. Remember, a little peril goes a long way in matters of the psyche. If that seems too tranquil for you, there were always alternative therapies such as let's make you shake and scream uncontrollably. This involved frightening rituals that flipped the mind into a faux calmness. Whether or not this worked, who's to say? Perhaps it scared the demons away. Even the average patient could send a shiver down their spine upon witnessing poorly behaved neighbours in need of treatment like straitjackets, fashioned from discarded animal skins. Never mind the lingering smell of not-so-fresh livestock notes wafting throughout the room. What's even more amazing is that, instead of the comforting embrace of understanding, the patient was often treated dreadfully by family and friends who seemed utterly lost in the jungle of variations for addressing mental distress. As if life weren't punitive enough, you had neighbours in hags' hats claiming to have the solution, throwing salt at you while doing a rain dance over a bubbling pot filled with who knows what. Hardly a balm to your nerves, isn't it? As time went on, what became clear was that the treatment shrouded shallow wisdoms of the era, brought only by some inappropriate humour and immediate forgetfulness, comprising the dwelling lack of understanding when it came to mental health issues. Luckily, as history pressed onward, some learned souls began to shed light on the terrifying practices. Fast forward a few centuries, while leeches might still be hanging around for the adventurous and those who read strange health blogs, we've thankfully replaced most of the absurd treatments with actual therapy and scientifically sound practices. So, dear listener, as we find comfort in our modern remedies, a cosy couch, good books, and cups of herbal tea, let's take a moment to truly be grateful for our ancestors who faced horrors beyond comprehension without so much as a Google search to guide them. Because while today's couch blessings seem mundane, The actuality of surviving the medieval circus of emotional support just seems wildly impressive. And if you think you had a rough day today, remember, they had to endure the wild mysticism of madness treatment and still somehow managed to give us modern medical advancements, leech-free until further notice. If you thought only nobles suffered under the medieval system, think again. Life was brutal for peasants, especially when consulting a physician. Peasants often received subpar care, with methods comparable to playing a game of who dies next, because as far as some doctors were concerned, their lives were expendable. Picture this. You're a medieval peasant, down on your luck, and suddenly you feel the telltale signs of a nasty illness. You gather your courage, not to mention your pennies, and make your way to the local healer or barber surgeon. If you're lucky, he might not be busy giving a haircut and bloodletting at the same time. The great irony. When you enter that dimly lit dirt floor hut, the doctor greets you with a grimace more befitting of a grave peril than healing. "Ah, peasants," you can almost hear him think as he sizes you up. This isn't a doctor treating a fellow human being, it's more like a banker assessing the value of a pile of hay. With a quick background check of your lingering shin splint, he may immediately reach for the leeches, not the experienced consultant sailing through Harvard's medieval school, but a bunch of hungry, wriggling nightmares that are surely auditioning for the next horror film. Forget about a thorough consultation. You'll be lucky if the physician can identify you by any mark other than that sad, dirt-crusted tunic you've been wearing since last harvest. If you survive your visit, of course. The noble class had the luxury of the latest medical scholars to prescribe remedies, while the likes of you were left with a local quack and a grim diagnosis. So if you show up with a slight cough, expect it to be treated as a near-fatal disease because honestly, who has time to care? Medieval practitioners were notorious for relying on exaggerated theories. Want to know why peasants are sickly? It's simple. Bad air, unfavourable humours, or perhaps a witch living next door. If you happen to be a peasant, it must be your karma. Doctors thought peasants' lives were a lottery where the winner could expect an especially hurtful prognosis, while nobility would often receive top-of-the-line remedies. Pity those folks living in squalor. When they rang the bell for help, they might as well be yelling, "Here's my life savings. If you could just poke a few holes in me, I'll feel better, right?" Your average peasant caught in this quagmire often turned to herbal remedies or the village healer. These healers, while not formally trained, had a wealth of knowledge regarding the local flora. Yes, they were at least somewhat effective, but let's face it, a potion made from crushed dandelions and prayers uttered into the wind hardly inspires confidence when the professional alternative is a gory leech siege. After all, a bad case of the pox was often treated as a mere inconvenience, a minor setback rather than a major health crisis. In fact, think of the average medieval diagnosis like a game of charades, but instead of clues, you're just given various flavours of panic. Ah, yes, your coughs. That's just your phlegm crying for help. Put one foot in the bucket of cold water, spin, and pray. Forget about knowing what's really wrong. You couldn't even decipher the doctor's handwriting. Scratch, scratch, scratch. A series of doodles that might have been a diagnosis, or the menu from the tavern down the road. And while aristocrats could afford to hire the best medical minds of the time, peasants weren't so lucky. They bore the burden further from life's medical epicentre, often left with a head full of foggy remedies and little more than hope after their visits to quack doctors. The prestige surrounding a noble's ailment often opened doors to better treatments. Meanwhile, peasant ancestors were resigned to enduring the age-old mantra, "It could always be worse." Of course, they were right. It often got worse. During the Black Death, peasants were truly at the mercy of fate. A mere sneeze could send ripples of hysteria through the fields, as their neighbours shaped a zombie-like allegiance to herbal tea and unproven potions. while the noble classes could sit comfortably, entertained by distant physicians dabbling in bloodletting methods thought to be revolutionary at the time. Let's face it, not much better than watching your neighbour getting blessed with leeches while you're left swatting away flies. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, remember this medieval tale where social stigma and medicine swung in rhythm, as peasants clung to a life of hope for better treatment, even amid scratches, leeches, and the overall dread of slightly too close encounters with sadistic apothecaries. Next time something feels off, consider yourself lucky. At least you have access to someone who won't attempt to cure you with a dash of leech and a sprinkle of poor life choices. Sweet dreams, my friend. May the sound of distant screaming only be a relic of medieval medicine rather than a rumble from your stomach. At the intersection of faith and medicine lies the medieval church, a major player in determining healthcare and the perceived science behind treatment. Resources were scarce, and praying the symptoms away seemed the better option, turning the church grounds into the original accident and emergency wards, minus the medical know-how. Picture the scene. Rows of devotees and the sickly huddled in prayerful desperation as they congregated around a flickering candle, emboldened by the belief that divine intervention would ease their suffering. Instead of doctors with a stethoscope, or even a friendly horse doctor prescribing herbal remedies, it was the local priest with a vial of holy water doing most of the curing. And naturally, if you were feeling under the weather, what's better than drenching yourself in prayers for someone to open the garden gates to heaven? Yet, given how some of those prayers went, you'd think there were more willing to cross that threshold than delay due to something silly like not being dead yet. The church held immense power that often trumped the judgment of the medieval physicians, sometimes sending patients to a divine healer when a simple leeching would suffice. Talk about a real God helps those who help themselves scenario. Except pray first, then swing by the barbers if the saints ever seem to ignore you. Lather yourself in sage and reprimand the heavens for your ailments. One thing is for sure, the church had a vested interest in the health of its patrons. A healthy congregation is a generous congregation, and church coffers filled by tithes were bolstered by pious souls grateful for the miracles they believed they were receiving. Imagine the clergy, donning their festive robes, heralding from their pulpits about the wonders of prayer, perhaps suggesting that just a sprinkle of holy water could chase away all ailments, while thoughts of "should I maybe inform you about the leeches too?" floated half-heartedly through their heads. In the major towns, the church transformed into something akin to a glorified hospital with a side of chapel. As patients filed in, they entered a carefully orchestrated setup, a place where the line between spiritual hope and physical health blurred. Healing was considered a divine gift, and the clergy was more than happy to play the part of the intermediaries. "Don't mind the backslapping and chanting," they'd say, waving off your skepticism with a holy shrug. "The Almighty walks among us, or at least on your head." Because who wouldn't want to be unwell and possibly brushed by a mystical aura? But let's not forget the darker side of this divine approach. With the church controlling the narrative, there emerged a certain kind of stigma attached to those who dared to challenge these treatments. If you sought relief outside the church's holy embrace, say, from a lowly herbalist or a barber surgeon, you were likely to be compared to those nefarious witches casting the devil's spell amidst the villages. "Suffering is part of God's plan," they cried, while conveniently forgetting that drowning a woman accused of witchcraft might get you a seat right beside them in paradise. Rituals conducted under the church's auspices often involved a series of somber ceremonies, reinforcing their divine authority. Healing services, masses dedicated to those afflicted by specific ailments, and even special days ordained by the church calendar for prayer gave the impression that your illness was communal. You're not sick. You're just one of many, meant sharing your woes with a crowd of fellow casualties, armed with nothing more than fervent prayers and guilt over missing last Sunday's service. In fact, the church became the peddler of magical cures more potent than any famous concoction. What's that? A common cold? Let's focus on some holy oil from the sacred olive tree. Your skin acting out? Throw in a few remnants from the last saintly pilgrimage. It was like collecting Pokemon cards, but instead you collected blessings to cure your bubonic plague. Ultimately, the church's dual role as both spiritual guide and health administrator lacked finesse, with saints handling most of the vocation and diseases appearing as sins in a game of divine balance. Both patients and practitioners were left with little choice but to adapt. After all, what else could you do when faced with leeches on one end and medieval clergy on the other? So, the medieval church, for all its quirks, provided a merry-go-round of hope and mysticism, ensuring that as people suffered, they would find a way to translate their despair into something Simon Cowell would proudly deem a cute audition. In medieval times, bathing was often avoided like a cold soup. The common advice: just sweat it out, and you might for once be sacred. Enter the dishevelled multitudes, each lacking an aesthetic defensive when flocks of disease swarmed around, making everybody that much more likely to develop strong opinions about leeches. Picture this: a noble family prancing about in their finest wool, while just beneath those layers an ecosystem flourished. The family dog would probably envy the thriving colonies of habitual lice and odoriferous odours making the rounds in the court, an unintentional circus of dermatological delight. Who could blame them, though? Bathing was such a rare occurrence that when it did happen, it often made headlines. Peasant discovers hot water and is declared wizard. For those lucky enough to dabble in the art of bathing, it was as much about survival as it was about cleanliness, or lack thereof. The medieval bathhouse, while promising a hot soak, often included a unique lineup of undesirables, body odour, uninvited fleas, and other patrons who may or may not have confused soap with a well-rinsed loaf. The setup had all the charm of a public loo after an all-you-can-eat beanfest. And let's not forget the marketing strategy employed by bathhouses. Come, be cured by the germs of your neighbours. For an extra coin, we'll give you a splash from last year's dirty water. It's no wonder that such establishments struggle to keep customers. A combination of disorderly filth and non-existent personal space made bathhouses seem less appealing than a lice-ridden wool tunic. And don't get me started on the so-called medicinal baths. It was the medieval equivalent of jumping into a gurgling vat of musk and who knows what. Herbal concoctions brewed for a mystical experience would be strewn haphazardly across the water's surface, turning it into some self-styled cauldron of questionable efficacy. Sure, they were sold as curatives, but if you took a careful whiff, it was more likely you'd breathe in an aromatic betrayal that smelled like a compost heap, hosting an all-you-can-eat pest buffet. Who needed aromatherapy when you had a soup of swamp herbs designed to ward off all known ailments, including good taste? Imagine rubbing lavender leaves on your underarms in hopes of warding off both BO and the Black Death. It's enough to send any modern-day essential oils enthusiast running for the hills. Most people in the Middle Ages might have just accepted their aromas as flavour, so to speak, us introducing us to the notion of being fabulously fragrant, with a level of self-resignation that would put any modern-day conspiracy theorist to shame. Now, when it came to washing lower parts, the entire strategy seemed to suggest that anything could be bypassed through sheer divine intervention. You see, washing your hair was one thing, mostly a communal comb fest on a particularly warm day filled with gossip about today's strange consumption of hay. but washing your body was often shunned outright, as many believed water would only allow diseases to sneak in like unwanted family. Most peasant women only renegotiated the boundaries of cleanliness once the summer heat turned their homes into hotboxes of sweaty despair. Thus emerged the concept of the pillow rinse, an innovative strategy to remove dirt while preserving the layers of festering grime, earning a personalised right to permanence. While members of the higher echelons might have tried washing their face after a month, the notion of body scrubbing was a vague rumour, whispered softly in the corners of the least crowded taverns. Still, the quest for cleanliness raged on, even amidst a smelly crowd flirting with leeches. Some brave souls embarked on epic journeys to source the latest fad herb, creating homemade scrubs that could have doubled as ballast on a sinking ship. The quest often culminated in failure, though, as herbalists found their concoctions producing not freshness, but a peculiar, overwhelming flavour of existential despair. So, as you sink back into your own personal pool of bubbles and hot water, lovingly appreciating your shower, complete with shampoo and moisturisers that promise you'll smell like a rose garden, remember this charming yet chaotic medieval pursuit. Appreciate those warm, purifying waters that give you solace while acknowledging the leech-riddled forefathers and mothers who blazed the trail for your clean shower routine. From the aromatic confusion of the bathhouse to the questionable benefits of a vinegar rinse, their legacy lives on, reminding us always to keep a healthy skepticism of any vaguely defined claims made in the name of cleanliness, and maybe to crank the hot water up just a notch for good measure. Seeking fortune in a bag of strange potions? Of course. Rattling jars of spider legs and promises of miraculous healing would lend themselves to countless tales of embarrassing outcomes. What's worse than the placebo effect? Trick your body into drinking unknown substances and return the favour with side effects nobody can pronounce. In the medieval world, the term medical advice was as real as dragons and about as useful. They believed that the mere act of throwing together some questionable ingredients was enough to create a miracle tonic that could cure a broken heart or battle a plague. Good luck with that. Imagine walking into an apothecary. You know, the medieval equivalent of a pharmacy that's also just a little bit shady. The shelves would be piled high with jars filled with everything from dried worms to pickled bat wings, and each concoction promised to solve your deepest ailments, but you also might end up farting rainbows for a week. The apothecary, wearing a cloak that looked suspiciously like it was woven out of your grandmother's sofa, might hand you a potion and say something like, "This should fix your backache. Just remember to swirl it around 3 times and tap your left foot." You'd blink and think, well, I guess it's worth a shot. The idea of using herbal remedies was both fascinating and a bit terrifying, akin to letting a toddler decide what's for dinner. Those herbs were often taken from sources displayed proudly in the apothecary's front window, which might have offered a nice view of the street, or perhaps a glimpse of the village idiot dressed as a knight. Was the healing really what it was cracked up to be? Take, for example, the highly sought-after mandrake root, which was stuffed with mythical qualities. People believed that if you pulled it from the ground, it would scream. Yes, scream. And that sound was thought to drive you mad. Ironic, considering you were already seeing it as a cure for insanity. Let's talk about pestilence powder, a whimsical concoction of lead and crushed herbs guaranteed to repel sickness. What they didn't mention was that you might end up with a severe case of indigestion, or worse, a running belly. You could very well be the recipient of food poisoning that could rival the nastiest of medieval flus. So great, you'll find yourself rushing to the loo instead of battling the plague. It's a win-win. Tinctures made from foxglove were touted as magical cures for all heart ailments. What they didn't tell you was that foxglove is also known for being dangerously toxic. But hey, if you were lucky, you'd kick the bucket feeling like a rock star before passing away from heart failure. Nothing says medieval medicine like playing hide and seek with your own health. And for those adventurous souls brave enough to visit a healer, you might be presented with a potion mixed from crushed pearls and moonlight. Not even joking. Onlookers would murmur, "Ah yes, good old Lady Gertrude is at it again," as she mixed up her all-cure elixir in the courtyard while simultaneously trying to summon a good crop. Spoiler alert, she still had a terrible garden, but her elixirs kept the villagers entertained. Jars labelled with bizarre names would line the walls, each promising to fix everything from crooked teeth to jealousy. What do you think about chalky elixir of delight? You gesture for that one with all the confidence of a toddler asking for cotton candy, only to find out what you just guzzled was actually a chalky mix designed to mask stomach discomfort, while causing you to suffer from some other issues, like random hiccuping fits during church service. Everyone's favourite. And let's not forget the audacity of urine therapy. Yes, that's right. People believed that drinking a glass of their own pee had miraculous healing properties. Imagine walking into a medieval tavern to see a couple of fellows nursing their special brews at the bar as if they were sipping the finest meads. No thank you. I don't need that. Allergic to bad taste. So, when it comes down to it, medieval medicine was a chaotic blend of untested theories, comical remedies, and absurd expectations. Each day was an adventure into the unknown, dotted with peculiar concoctions that often did more harm than good. While leeches were out there sucking away your health, wild potions were likely just around the corner waiting to turn your life into one large medieval sitcom, complete with unfortunate side effects. But hey, at least you could chalk the whole experience up to an unforgettable tale, one featuring explicit humour and bizarre ingredients that would make even modern health fanatics raise an eyebrow. As you drift into sleep, remember, next time you're feeling under the weather, perhaps just a cup of herbal tea will suffice, leaving the wild concoctions to the brave souls who might still think a little pixie dust is the ultimate cure. The medieval doctor, a paragon of health, was often merely the most flamboyant liar. Their reputation sparked the rise of medical myths that plagued patients more than real medicine ever could, leaving everything to speculation. Who needs qualifications when leeches are always on standby? Doctors of this era were like the slightly unhinged magicians at a children's party, bringing joy and terror in equal measure. You might show up with a simple cough and leave with an explanation for your ailments involving dragons and bad air. It's a 2-for-1 deal that modern medicine is still working to get right. So, what exactly made these doctors the grand showmen of their time? Just imagine a healer's office, if one could even call it that. It's more of a cluttered hut filled with dusty texts, questionable potions, and an assortment of bones that look more decorative than diagnostic. If you're lucky, the doctor might have a wonderful bedside manner, which usually consists of a grandiose eloquence about the humours. He'll regale you with epic tales about balance, a very delicate balance, mind you, like a tightrope walker teetering a bit too close to the edge. If your nerves are frayed from his dramatic diagnosis, don't worry. He'll simply prescribe a course of herbal extracts that may or may not involve the stew left in his cupboard since the last full moon. But wait, there's more. For while today's medical professionals specialise in specific fields like cardiology or paediatrics, back in the medieval period, a doctor had a sprinkle of everything. Herbalist, barber, wisdom of the ages, and occasional magician. You could visit one man and receive a haircut, a cure for your consumption, and, why not, a new recipe for a dinner casserole. This remarkable versatility might have sounded like an attractive package, but it really meant each visit was more of a gamble than heading out for a night of medieval beer drinking, uncertainty hanging heavy in the air, and your life hanging by a thread. Germs? What germs? Here's a delightful concept. Medieval doctors believed that illnesses were caused by bad air, or as they called it, miasma. That's right. Bad smells roamed through cities like angry spirits, carrying diseases in their wake. So if you came down with the flu, forget tissues and chicken soup. Instead, you were expected to flee to the freshest air possible, most likely a nearby pig pen. If that doesn't work, just don't breathe. Genius. You might even be subjected to bleeding, because obviously nothing says I care like sending you home with less blood than a squirrel. Don't worry, those trusty leeches, also called the little friends, were always available to help reduce that pesky excess of blood. They might just suck the life out of your ailments, metaphorically speaking, leaving you feeling nauseated, dizzy, and just slightly less infected with a complimentary headache. Adding to the allure of these medieval medical practices were the incredible remedies rumoured to cure just about anything. For instance, if you had the misfortune of splitting your side open after a run-in with a ruffian, the recommended treatment might involve rubbing cow dung mixed with crushed snail shells on your wound. Because you know dirt and snails are now considered essential oils, and let's face it, if you're aiming for natural, it doesn't get more authentic than that. And let's not forget the infamous charm of the earthy doctors promising miraculous herbal concoctions. This could cure anything, they'd say, while waving about a rickety vial filled with mystery liquid. If you suspected the contents were just boiled weeds, you'd best not mention it, especially when the last patient came back raving about the health benefits of mouldy cheese and honey. Yet, perhaps the most ironic joke of all was that in a world rife with erroneous beliefs about human anatomy and very few signs of medical ethics, doctors often held an unshakable public trust. Feeling unwell? A hug or warm gaze from your doctor could give you the assurance of healing just by their very presence. If nothing else, that was at least comforting, if a bit misplaced. So in the end, it turns out that medieval doctors, those charismatic, leech-loving figures, thrive not just on the notion of healing, but on the spectacle of their very own narratives. They were entertainers in a world thirsty for answers, armed with little more than a laughable grasp of medical principles and an extraordinary ability to keep the show going. Just remember, next time you catch a cold and go for the nearest herbal tea, thank your lucky stars you don't have to rely on the medieval doctor with his bag of leeches and a benediction for an incense that smells suspiciously like yesterday's goat stew. Herbs served as the original battlefield where herbalists and physicians warred over who had the more magical powers. You could pick up a flower and feel great, or head to the dock only to return half empty. Just remember, a witch with herbs was still chaotically less dishevelled than an unprepared doctor, much to everyone's surprise. It was the quintessential clash of the titans where common sense met medieval chaos, and the stakes, well, your survival was one of them. As the medieval world unfolded, herbalists were akin to your eccentric aunt who had a remedy for everything. Maybe it was holistic, and maybe it involved grinding a few questionable-looking roots. They were the real MVPs, blending knowledge of plants handed down through generations with a splash of creativity. If you ever found yourself feeling off, you could wander into their makeshift apothecary, filled with jars that looked like they hosted a gathering of the uncanny. Imagine a place smelling faintly of chamomile with just a hint of something that might make you question your life choices, a touch of magic, if you will. Meanwhile, the physicians, dressed in their long robes that looked like they raided a monk's closet, demanded respect, but often offered more theories than solutions. Armed with their ancient texts, which might as well have been the medieval equivalents of random tweets, they believed firmly in the balance of humours. You might approach one with a swollen ankle, only to be told you had an excess of black bile, or perhaps the dreaded yellow bile. No, this wasn't some medieval cholesterol problem. It was just how they diagnosed having maybe spent one too many nights eating spoiled fish from the market. So, what was the mix-up between healing with herbs and science? And by science, I mean whatever bloggers believe sounds like medicine today. Herbalists had a delicate relationship with the earth that involved more intuition and nature walks. They'd tell you to drink chamomile tea for sleep or sip ginger to calm your upset stomach. Meanwhile, physicians would confidently brandish leeches like trophies from some twisted hunting trip, believing that draining the little life you had left might just curtail the illness that caused you to come see them in the first place. But you have to admit, there was something charmingly absurd about this dynamic. Picture a doctor prepared for an appointment, clutching a bag with foaming snakes, ready to turn you into a bleeding work of art. Now imagine a herbalist with stains of beet juice speckled on her dress, grinning as she handed over a concoction concocted amidst the aromas of dried lavender and little catnip. Sure, there were probably fewer side effects with the herbalist. The worst you might face was an awkward conversation with a prediction of which ancestor was lingering around. The rivalry reached epic proportions when people began to notice. The herbalist often had repeat customers. Whether it was through word of mouth or curious villagers eager to turn their ailments into herbal remedies, these magical flower whisperers gained ground. Yet, the physician class was a bit like the internet trolls to herbalism's sweet, refreshing smoothie. Physicians were often stubborn and clung to their scrolls of medical texts, thinking of themselves as the gatekeepers to real knowledge, careful to ignore that herbs were often cheaper than what they charged just for a quick peek into your mouth. In hindsight, both sides had their moments of greatness and absolute absurdity. The herbalists could whip up potions that made you feel like you just danced on clouds, while physicians could also provide you with the classic medieval experience: confusion, dread, and laughs about how your blood might actually save or kill you. In the end, though they battled over the best remedies, neither faction was entirely above suspicion. The herbalist might whip up a potion to enhance good vibes, but who knew if they'd also offered to throw in a raccoon's foot for extra magical flair? Of course, history granted victory to neither side, ultimately leaving us with a charming mix of absurd and less than reliable medicinal practices. But lest anyone forget, today's realities still weave tales that echo those rivalries. Every time you wear essential oils, blend a weird smoothie, or question your doctor's medicinal choice, remember that you might just be recreating the medieval magical debate into your everyday life, all from the comfort of your lavish, non-dung floors. So, whether you're team herbalist or physician, one thing is clear. Both are likely to have a good chuckle about how hilariously trying it was to just be human back then. The magic lives on in us all, especially when our common cold might actually be the result of a belly full of improperly brewed beer. Cheers to that. If you're ready, let me know, and I can continue with the next segment. As medieval medicine gradually relinquished its wild theories, some lessons rolled in. Sure, not everyone learned how to save a life effectively, but the growing clamour for appropriate care and hygiene paved the way for modern medicine. So the next time you sip ginger tea and contemplate life's elusive essence, raise a glass to those leeches. You may not miss them, but you couldn't do it without them. Imagine a world where medicine was as dependable as a blind knight on a treacherous battlefield. The transition from medieval healing practices to modern methods wasn't exactly a straight path. It was more of a meandering journey through potholes of confusion, mixed with moments of sheer brilliance and a dash of absolute absurdity. Picture this. Medieval physicians clad in woolen robes believed that bad air or miasma wafting about was the source of most ailments. No wonder they often sent patients outdoors to breathe in the fresh pollutants, because who wouldn't want to catch pneumonia while trying to recover from a common cold? A medieval doctor's ideal prescription might have involved a stroll through the local pigsty or a seat beside a sewer. "Just breathe deep, my good fellow. It'll clear your head," they might have declared, all while mistaking your grimacing face as a sign of pleasure rather than panic. Let's address the colourful terminology that most physicians wielded like a rapier: cures were colourful to say the least. Imagine being told to swig back a broth concocted from the hooves of a goat, while a doctor earnestly asserts, "It's a wonder cure for everything from headaches to heartbreak." You'd be left wondering whether to run for the hills or roll your eyes sky high, and if that didn't get you, the burst of optimism they offered while mixing bat wings with pickled frog eyeballs would surely send you into fits of laughter, or a fainting spell. But there was a sliver of progress amidst the madness. The Renaissance rolled in like a much-needed spring rain, refreshing and reviving scholarly curiosity. Physicians began seeking more reason than ritual, turning away from the largely poetic whims of ancient texts to actual experimentation. But let's not be too quick to hand them gold stars. The process was so slow that if a tortoise were racing with them, it would have effortlessly taken a souvenir photo along the way and still won. One step forward often became 2 steps back, especially when doctors found themselves stuck in debates over whether to trust ancient Greek philosophers or to place faith in those pesky things called facts. Enter the both terrifying and enlightening rise of dissection. Finally, learning about the human body by cutting it open instead of guessing based on textbook illustrations. Picture the first daring souls taking the plunge into anatomy classes, surrounded by eager eyes trying to solve the puzzle of the human body. The first dissections were a spectacle, like a medieval bake-off where no one had seen the cake's ingredients, and everyone wondered why it might not resemble a wedding cake when it was done. Spectators from all walks gathered, some with enthusiasm while others watched through half-closed eyes, foreseeing the potential horror of what they might uncover. "Ah yes, the heart should be here," one may have eruditely murmured, while casually airing out their breakfast in a near-fainting fit. Yet, the undercurrent of superstition still ebbed and flowed through the practice of medicine. With every advanced theory hailed as revolutionary, the once famed healing powers of leeches stubbornly clung to life like a stray cat in a witch's lair. The notion that these slimy little creatures could drain you of blood and then cure you of all that ailed you? Fantastic, if not slightly delusional. Moving forward, new medical charlatans began sprouting up like weeds after a spring shower, hawking their so-called remedies just as confidently as they carried a bouquet of leeches in their satchels. Fast forward a few centuries later to the era of industrial revolution, with all that steam, machines and balls of bacteria swirling around in cosy petri dishes. It's almost laughable how far medicine has come since the time leeches were considered VIP guests at every sickbed gathering. It's even momentarily jarring to contemplate that the number of failed experiments, strange theories, and overly optimistic diagnoses now hides behind the veil of pharmaceutical advancements and ethical practices. In the end, history isn't just a procession of failures, it's a beautifully orchestrated symphony of trial and error, complete with comedic missteps along the way. So as you get ready to shut your eyes or finish your afternoon tea, just remember, even a failed leech experiment is part of the colourful tapestry that led us to where we are today. Raise a glass to the brave souls from centuries past who muddled through, inadvertently crafting the intricate paths we now navigate in our quest for health and well-being. Lessons learned thanks to a few blood-sucking friends and, let's be honest, a healthy dose of human absurdity. With every cure that sowed more confusion than clarity, medieval patients carried ailments to their graves, both physically and psychologically. How's that for a comedy? Despite the leeches, the cobwebs, and the inevitable medical misadventures, it's a miracle some emerge with a shred of sanity. Because history, it might just be crazier than a doctor who thought a leech could fix your everything. Picture yourself in a medieval village, where doctors were like the rock stars of healthcare, if rock stars wore wool robes and kept a collection of leeches in their pockets. One moment you're suffering from a fever, and the next you have someone hovering over you, clutching a bucket filled with squirmy bloodsuckers. "Worry not," they exclaim. "These little guys will suck all the badness out of you." Just think of them as tiny therapists working their magic. Sure, the price of therapy was a bit steep, but hey, at least these counsellors kept it interesting. Nothing screams medical genius like slapping a slimy leech on an ailing patient like some twisted version of a slap bracelet. Now, you might wonder how it ended for these families, riddled with magical thinking and questionable treatments. Surviving medieval mishaps often left people mentally scarred, rediscovering trauma every time they recalled their last trip to the barber surgeon. Imagine trying to have a casual family dinner when Uncle Bartholomew starts reminiscing about the time he lost most of his blood to a 3-hour siege of regulated bloodletting. Great for charcuterie, not so great for a healthy, balanced life. As ridiculous as it sounds, many people didn't fully comprehend their ailments. Imagine walking around with a constant itch and scratching away with reckless abandon. Doctors would advise you to just let it be, while you were convinced it was the worst curse known to man. Alas, the aftermath of such dismissals left many patients with a burgeoning phobia of cats, flowers, and even watery streams, believing everything could lead them to a horrible fate. The acute realization that they might never again feel normal came crashing down, harder than shattered church pews on a stormy night. But wait, there's more. Enter the realm of forgotten remedies. You were far more likely to feel better if someone cooked you a stew made of dubious ingredients that had already claimed the lives of 10 other victims than to actually find anything remotely useful at the apothecary. What's on the menu tonight? Rat, mouldy bread, or Uncle Ferdinand's last meal of fermented cabbage? Delicious. Better than any modern meal prep you could conjure from a Pinterest board. At least you had a story to tell, or more accurately, an experience that would descend into folkloric legend through the ages. In the midst of medieval healing, your social standing also heavily influenced treatment. How delightful! If you were a peasant, your chances of seeing a real physician dwindled like a log fire to embers. Instead, you'd find yourself subjected to a local herbalist blending tinctures while recanting tales of childhood mishaps, a one-way ticket to misdiagnosis heaven. In contrast, nobility received specialised attention with physicians who might as well have been magicians pulling rabbits out of hats, except the rabbits were cured corpses from the priory. Of course, all of this chaos only adds more sepia tone to the past, making you wonder how we are here, now, without medieval plagues and barber surgeons running wild. Yet the slippery slopes of history also reveal that somehow, despite the failings of medieval medicine, individuals began to emerge with glimmers of healthier futures. Seeds of science were sown, and people yearned for knowledge beyond blood-sucking creatures and sympathizing apothecaries. The rise of a new school of thought, where logic took precedence over superstition, finally stepped onto the stage. Physicians began to investigate the body, noting its workings, urgently moving away from beating a leech with enchanted twigs to additional research. Guess what? Humans survived it all. They learned to drink water instead of soup mixed with herbal sludges while surfing on a sea of conflicting medical advice. So, as you gently roll into dreamland tonight, remember that the trials and tribulations of those medieval patients had resulted in profound changes in how we perceive health. They pushed the world from leeches and hysteria toward understanding ourselves at our most vulnerable. So the next time you're feeling under the weather, be thankful you can sip room temperature ginger tea instead of writhing under the ministrations of the latest therapy involving swarms of hungry leeches. Who knew survival came with such a hefty dose of absurdity?